So a lot of companies provide software as a virtual appliance, an image for a virtual machine. That might be an OVA package or a raw disk image or a VMDK or something like that. In any case, we need to get that file into Proxmox as a disk for our virtual machine. And here's how.
So today I have a Proxmox system, version 7.2.11, and I would like to import a MikroTik cloud-hosted router. And I chose the CHR because it's available in so many different image formats for the same image. So we can do the VMDK, we can do the OVA, or the raw disk image. All three of these are possible to import into Proxmox, and we can show the process for all three. So before we can import anything, the first thing we need to do is actually create the virtual machine. So we're going to go through this, make a router. You can set the options however you'd like. We're not going to set a CD drive. And when it comes to disks, you can basically set whatever you want here because we're going to delete it later. So I'll set it to ZFS, but we're going to delete this anyway. So it doesn't matter what you put here. You just have to put something to make the wizard happy. 2 cores, a little bit of RAM, and network. So now that the VM is created, we can detach and delete the hard disk we created. So we'll start by detaching it. Now it'll show up as unused disk, and once it's unused, we can remove it. There we go. So now the VM has no disk. We can even delete this CD-ROM attachment too. So now we need to get our virtual appliance imported as a disk so we can add it to our virtual machine. So coming to the shell here, we need to download the file. One option you have is to download it to an existing data store. So like, for example, I could go to ISO images and click download from URL, and it would end up in my ISOs folder. The other option is to just put it in the root user's home directory, which thing says is /root. If you have enough space on your root partition, you can just put it here and delete it later. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to start with the OVA since it's the most complicated. I'm going to use Router OS 7.6 stable. So I need the URL. So I'm going to right click on that and say copy link. So go over here, I'm going to wget it. Wget, paste. There we go. Done. So let's see what file we got. So we got chr 7.6.ova. So the OVA file is actually just tard, and it's not even gzipped, it's just tard. So we can extract that using tar -xvf. So tar-xcf and then the file name. And it says we got 3 files, the OVF, the MF, and the VMDK. So the OVF, if we cat that, is an XML file that describes the system. So in this case, Proxmox isn't going to be able to read the OVF, so we're going to have to import this sort of configuration manually. So the MF file is also just checksums, which might be useful for you if you want to verify them, but I have faith that this was downloaded correctly. So the VMDK, that is the actual disk image. And so now we're going to import the disk image. So now we've extracted the disk image from the OVA, and we can import it like any other raw disk image, in this case with the VMDK format. So let's jump ahead and how we import disks into Proxmox. So now that we have our disk image file in a VMDK format, but this will also work with RAW and QCOW2 formats if you have one of those, we need to import it. And the command we use for that is qm. So qm is one of the management commands from Proxmox. And there's a qm command called import disk. And this is what we're going to use. So we're going to take this disk file and tell it to import it as an external disk into a VM. So we need to give it the VM ID, which we've already created, the file that we have, and the storage location we're going to add it to. So in this case, it can be an image file or a raw file or a VMDK or a QCOW2. All of those will work. We have one option, and that's what format we should put the resulting file as. And if you're using ZFS or LVM or a block-based storage device, this doesn't matter at all. This can use native ZFS block devices or native LVM devices. If you're using a file-based storage like NFS or Samba or ext4 or something like that, then you need to pass this target format, which can either be QCOW2, RAW, or VMDK. And in most cases in Proxmox, you're going to want QCOW2 if you're using file-based storage. In my case, I'm using ZFS, so I'm going to leave out the format argument. So come back here, we see the file we have is called chr7.6.disk1. So we're going to qm import disk. We're going to import it to VM202. The file name is chr-7.6disk1.vmdk. And the storage location I want it to go in is local ZFS. So of course you need to know what storage location you have in Proxmox. And I'm not going to give it a format argument because ZFS has native block devices, so I don't need to. Oh, I spelled it wrong. There we go. So now we have imported the disk into Proxmox. Now it is going to show up under local ZFS, so VM202 disk 0. It's pretty darn tiny. But it's not yet attached to the VM. So once you've imported the VMDK, you don't need any of the files anymore that were used to create it. So we can remove the VMDK, the OVA, all of those files. We can get rid of them now. The VM has been imported, it's in Proxmox's storage system. No need for the origin anymore. So we tagged it as being part of VMID 202, but we haven't told it how to attach that yet. So if we go here, we see unused disk, local ZFS VM202 disk 0. So this disk, it knows belongs to VM202, but it's not sure how to attach it yet. So we could reassign it to a different VM. So now to get it mounted in the VM, we just double click on it and we add unused disk. So you can choose what bus you want to use. I'm going to use SATA. That's a pretty good option. SSD emulation and disk card are usually pretty good options to use. Let's add that. Size, 128 megs. Another option you have here is to resize it if you want to make it bigger. So we could say resize it by 1 gig. So at this point we've added the disk, but we didn't tell it that it's bootable. So we have to go down here to Options and Boot Order. And you see Net0 is the only bootable device. So we have to add our new drive, say to 0, and move it to the top so it doesn't try to net boot on us. And there we go, it should boot. So now if we just want this one VM here, we could boot it up, and that would be the end of the story. Or we can turn it into a template. So we right-click on the VM and say Convert to Template. Yes. Then we're done. So now this is a template, and it has a different icon because it's a template. So now, if we want to make new versions of the CHR router, we can just click Clone. So we want to make this name 203. So if we make a full clone, then we can choose a new location for the disk and all that stuff. If we make a linked clone, then the VM disk is still linked to the source, so we can't change the location because they're going to share the source file. And just modifications to the disk will be stored for this clone of the template. So now I have a new clone of my template. It's based on 202 disk 0, but it has its own disk 0. It's good to go. So now when I start it, so it resized the disk to fill the whole space, and now we have a login.
So hopefully you guys didn't mind this shorter topic this week. I'm actually on vacation for Thanksgiving, so I filmed this before I left. Just want to keep continuity on the channel, don't like going offline for too long. Got some nice big projects coming up soon. Hopefully you can stay tuned for those, so like and subscribe to see more of my future content. If you want to read the commands or copy and paste them, there's a blog post in the description below that has all that. If you want to chat with me about this or anything else Proxmox related, feel free to jump into my Discord server, also linked down below for that. So as always, I'll see you on the next adventure.